At 12:17 a.m., Sadie Price was pushing her cleaning cart across the dark executive floor when she heard someone crying. Beside the rain-streaked windows sat Grant Whitmore, CEO of Meridian Medical Systems. His tie loosened a board proposal scattered across the floor. Sadie quietly turned away, unwilling to steal a man's dignity just because no one else was watching. Then Grant spoke. "What do you do when every choice hurts someone?" Sadie looked at the papers near his shoes and answered with only 6 words. "Then ask who pays for it." The next morning, her supervisor found her gripping a mop beside the service elevator. "Sadie, the board wants you upstairs." She thought she was being fired. "Before we continue, tell us what country you're watching from and your local time. And if stories about people the world overlooks mean something to you, consider subscribing." 3 weeks before anyone on Meridian Medical Systems board knew her name, Sadie Price was standing barefoot in her kitchen at 4:38 in the afternoon, pressing a warm iron over the pocket of her navy work shirt. The pocket had torn along one corner again. She could have bought another shirt for $14 from the uniform supplier. Instead, she had stitched the tear with dark blue thread, covered it with a dish towel, and pressed the seam flat until it almost disappeared. $14 was $14. On the refrigerator behind her, held beneath a faded magnet shaped like the state of Pennsylvania, was a white envelope with 2 words written across it in black ink. Micah College. Every Friday, Sadie put $25 inside. Some weeks, $25 felt small. Other weeks, it felt impossible. But the envelope was never empty. "Mom." Sadie turned. Her 17-year-old son, Micah Price, stood in the kitchen doorway with a bowl of cereal in one hand and a college brochure in the other. He was tall enough now that Sadie sometimes caught herself wondering when exactly the little boy who used to fall asleep against her shoulder had disappeared. "You know you can stop ironing that thing," he said. "Nobody at work cares if your pocket is crooked. I care. That's different. That's the point." Micah smiled. Sadie unplugged the iron. Their duplex in Hazelwood was modest 2 bedrooms upstairs, a kitchen with cabinets that never quite closed properly, and a radiator that knocked 3 times before producing heat. Sadie paid $1.80 a month in rent. She knew the number as intimately as she knew Micah's birthday. She knew the electric bill. She knew the car insurance. She knew the balance on the credit card she had used when the water heater failed the previous winter. Numbers had always made sense to Sadie. People sometimes didn't. She opened the refrigerator and took out the sandwich she had prepared that morning, turkey mustard, 1 slice of cheese. Beside it sat a small container of apple slices. Micah watched her put them into a brown lunch bag. "You work in a building with a cafeteria, and they throw away more food in one night than we eat in a week." Sadie glanced at him. "If they offer it to me, I'll take it. And if they don't, then it isn't mine." Micah rolled his eyes affectionately. "You're exhausting. I raised you. Imagine how I feel." That earned a laugh. Sadie picked up her keys from the counter. There were 7 of them on the ring, but one looked different. Small, brass. Old enough that the edges had been polished smooth by years of fingers. It opened nothing in their house. As far as Sadie knew, it opened nothing anywhere anymore. But she had carried it for 9 years. It had belonged to her husband, Darius. He had worked maintenance most of his adult life, the kind of man who could listen to a furnace for 10 seconds and tell you which bearing was failing. Darius hated throwing away anything that could still be repaired. He used to hold up that little brass key whenever Sadie complained about the ridiculous number of keys he carried. A key is only useful when someone remembers what it opens. At the time, she had laughed. After he died, she stopped finding the sentence funny. Sadie kissed Micah on the forehead, despite his theatrical attempt to escape. "Homework." "Yes, ma'am." "And finish the scholarship application." "Yes, ma'am." "And don't yes, ma'am me while planning to ignore me." Micah grinned. Outside, Sadie's 2008 Chevrolet Malibu waited beneath a maple tree, its silver paint dulled by 18 Pittsburgh winters. The odometer read 183, 4 and 17 miles. The engine hesitated before starting. Sadie listened carefully. There was a faint shudder. Not tonight, she thought. Please, not tonight. She drove toward downtown with the radio low and reached Meridian Medical Systems 12 minutes before her shift. At 18:40, an hour being early did not increase her paycheck. Sadie was early anyway. Meridian occupied a 12-story glass and steel building overlooking the Monongahela River. During daylight hours, executives, engineers, salespeople, and hospital representatives moved through its lobby beneath a brushed metal company logo. Sadie usually arrived as many of them were leaving. That was how she liked it. Less traffic, more room to work. At 5:56 p.m., she changed into her uniform, tied her natural black curls into a low bun, and checked the supply sheet. Restrooms on 6 through 9, executive offices on 10, conference rooms, hallway glass, trash, vacuuming. Then the lower service corridor near the repair department, if time allowed. Sadie clipped her keyring to her belt. The brass key tapped softly against the others. By 7:30, the building had begun emptying. People passed her in the halls. Some nodded. A few smiled. Most did neither. A man in a gray suit stepped around her yellow caution sign without looking up from his phone. Two employees continued discussing a co-worker's divorce, while Sadie emptied the trash can 3 feet away. Another woman entered a restroom Sadie was cleaning, glanced at her, and immediately resumed a confidential phone conversation. Sadie had learned something during 6 years of night cleaning. People became remarkably honest around anyone they considered invisible. She never used what she heard. She simply noticed. At 8:20, Sadie entered the cafeteria. A worker named Keisha was closing the food stations. "There's chicken left," Keisha said. "You want some? Is it cleared?" Keisha lifted a plastic container. "Manager said staff can take it or it gets tossed." "Then yes." Keisha laughed. "You ask that every time, and every time you answer." Sadie placed the chicken carefully beside her sandwich for Micah's lunch the next day. At 9:47, she reached the lower service corridor. The atmosphere there was different from the polished executive floors. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, rolling carts, shelves of components. This was where Meridian's patient monitoring equipment came, when hospitals returned units for servicing. Sadie had cleaned the corridor hundreds of times. That night, however, something blocked part of her usual route. A pallet, then another. Black medical monitors were stacked in rows each with a bright disposal sticker attached. Sadie maneuvered her cleaning cart around them. She stopped. There seemed to be more than usual. She looked toward the repair bay. Through the open doorway, a broad-shouldered older man sat alone beneath a work lamp. Leonard Brooks. Sadie knew his name because Leonard was one of the few people in the building who knew hers. He had been with Meridian longer than almost anyone. Late night, Sadie called. Leonard didn't look up. Every night is late when somebody upstairs discovers a new definition of efficiency. Sadie smiled slightly. She resumed mopping. A few minutes later, she heard wheels rattling behind her. Another cart appeared. More monitors. The employee pushing it parked beside the pallets and walked away. Sadie stared at the growing line. Something bothered her. Not because she understood medical equipment. She didn't. But she understood routines. Last month, maybe one pallet had waited there at a time. Now there were 4. She glanced at one disposal label. Scrap, another. Scrap, a third scrap. Sadie crouched beside the nearest monitor. The casing wasn't cracked. The screen looked intact. There was no obvious damage she could see. Leonard appeared behind her. "Careful," he said. "Those things are apparently worthless." The bitterness in his voice made her stand. Apparently, Leonard looked toward the empty corridor before answering. "New evaluation rules." Sadie glanced at the pallet again. "How much does one of these cost depends on the model." He started back toward the repair bay. "Thousands." Sadie looked at him, then at the word scrap, then back at him. "Thousands," Leonard gave a tired shrug. "Not my decision." He disappeared through the doorway. Sadie stood still for another moment. Then she returned to her cart. Her job was cleaning, not inventory, not finance, not management. She reminded herself of that while she finished the corridor. At 1:09 a.m., Sadie clocked out. The Malibu started on the second attempt. When she reached home, the kitchen light was still on. Micah had fallen asleep at the table with his head resting beside an open scholarship application. Sadie stood in the doorway watching him. Then she quietly placed the container of chicken in the refrigerator. Before turning off the kitchen light, she checked the white envelope. $25 was still inside from Friday. She touched it once. Then she climbed upstairs. The next evening, Sadie returned to Meridian. At 9:52, she reached the lower corridor again. 5 pallets were waiting. Not 4. 5. Sadie slowed her cleaning cart. Another monitor had just been added. Its disposal sticker was fresh. Scrap. She looked through the repair bay window. Leonard was holding a screwdriver in one hand and staring at the growing row of machines. Sadie touched the keys clipped to her belt. The little brass one tapped against her thumb. She didn't know it yet, but something inside Meridian was being thrown away far too quickly. And Sadie Price was about to become the first person who bothered to count it. By the following Tuesday, Sadie Price had stopped believing the pallets were a coincidence. She still didn't think of herself as investigating anything. Investigation belonged to auditors, managers, people with badges clipped to expensive belts, and spreadsheets open across 2 monitors. Sadie had a mop. She had a trash cart. And she had 6 years of knowing what Meridian's hallways normally looked like after everyone else went home. At 9:41 p.m., she pushed her cart into the service corridor and counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 pallets, 23 monitors. The night before, there had been 19. Sadie frowned. A rolling cart stood beside the repair bay with 3 more units waiting to be moved. Through the open doorway, Leonard Brooks sat beneath a work lamp, his reading glasses low on his nose. He was working on one of the monitors marked for disposal. "You stealing company property now?" Sadie asked. Leonard glanced up. "At my age, I'd steal something lighter." She smiled and continued wiping the glass partition. Behind her came a soft electronic beep. Sadie turned. The monitor on Leonard's bench had come alive. Numbers and test patterns appeared across its screen. Sadie looked toward the disposal sticker still attached to the casing. Scrap. That one's being thrown away was. What was wrong with it? Leonard held up something between his fingers. It was so small Sadie had to step closer. A connector. That. How much? Leonard gave her a curious look. How much what the part? $18 maybe. Depends who we're buying from. Sadie stared at the monitor. And the machine hospital probably paid several thousand. She looked from the tiny connector to the screen. So why was it scrap? Leonard leaned back. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he removed his glasses. Because the new evaluation system gives us a repair window. A what-a target. Amount of labor time. If diagnostics start running too long, the software calculates whether repair is economically justified. That sounds reasonable. It is reasonable. Leonard's expression hardened slightly, until reasonable becomes automatic. He explained that Meridian had introduced new efficiency standards several months earlier. Technicians were expected to evaluate returned equipment faster. If projected labor parts and processing exceeded certain thresholds, replacement could be recommended. Sadie looked towards the pallets. "And you're saying those are repairable? I'm saying some are." "How many?" Leonard shook his head. "That's the question, isn't it?" He turned back to his bench. Sadie returned to her cart. She should have left it there. Instead, she looked at the small connector resting beside Leonard's hand. $18. Without thinking, she reached into the side pocket of her cart and pulled out a discarded cleaning inspection slip. On the blank back, she wrote the equipment number from the monitor's label. Then repair connector $18. Sadie stared at what she had written. It felt ridiculous. She folded the slip and slipped it into her pocket. The following night, she did it again. Then again, not confidential information, not files from desks, only equipment numbers and disposal labels visible in the area she cleaned, along with things Leonard mentioned during ordinary conversation. Unit 4471, scrap, Unit 4498, repair, Unit 4513, scrap. Sadie's old habits returned surprisingly quickly. Before Darius became sick, she had completed 3 semesters of bookkeeping at Allegheny County Community College. She had loved reconciliation exercises, the quiet satisfaction of finding the one number that didn't belong. Life had interrupted before she earned the certificate. But life had not erased the way her mind worked. Within a week, folded cleaning slips had accumulated in the pocket of her uniform. Upstairs, another set of numbers was being assembled. Rebecca Sloan stood before a screen in Grant Whitmore's conference room on the 10th floor. 11.8 million over 3 years, she said. Grant sat at the head of the table. On the screen, a presentation showed the proposed consolidation of Meridian's in-house repair operation. Rebecca advanced the slide. Third-party service reduces fixed labor exposure warehouse requirements and parts inventory. More importantly, it makes costs predictable. Grant studied the projection. How many positions? Rebecca hesitated. 286 directly affected, potentially just over 300 after consolidation. Grant's jaw tightened. Rebecca noticed. Grant, I know, do you? Yes. Her voice remained calm. And I also know what happens if the lenders decide our operating margin is structurally unsustainable. Grant looked back at the screen. Rebecca continued. We aren't choosing between hurting people and not hurting people. We're choosing how much damage the company can survive. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Far below, Sadie was emptying a trash can beside Leonard's workbench. She noticed a monitor with its casing removed. Another one. Leonard nodded. Power board looked bad. Turned out to be a cracked solder joint. Cost practically nothing. Labor's the cost. Sadie reached for another discarded slip. Leonard noticed. What are you writing? Nothing important. That doesn't look like nothing. Sadie paused. She considered hiding the paper, then decided she had no reason to. I keep seeing machines going out, she said. I'm trying to understand how many. Leonard stared at her. You planning to become CFO at $18.40 an hour? They can't afford me. Leonard laughed for the first time that week. Then the laugh faded. Don't get yourself in trouble, Sadie. I'm writing numbers on trash. In this building, people have gotten in trouble for less. Sadie folded the paper. How bad is it? Leonard looked toward the repair bay. Several technicians had already gone home. Empty benches stretched beneath fluorescent lights. Friday after next, he said. What happens Friday board meeting? He picked up his screwdriver. They're voting on whether this department should exist. Sadie looked through the doorway. How many people here? About 160. And the rest parts. Shipping, field support. Leonard lowered his eyes. My guess close to 300 when they're done. Sadie felt the folded slips in her pocket. 300 jobs. She thought of Micah's college envelope. $25 every Friday. She thought of how carefully a household could be balanced around a single paycheck. Then she looked at the pallets again. That night after cleaning the corridor, Sadie sat alone in the employee break room. She spread her slips across the table. Dates, equipment numbers, repair, scrap, parts. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't even sure there was anything to prove, but one pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. The scrap column was getting longer. Sadie gathered the papers, aligned their edges carefully, and folded them in half. When she stood, the brass key on her belt struck the table with a quiet, metallic click. For some reason, she remembered Darius. A key is only useful when someone remembers what it opens. Sadie slipped the papers into her pocket. Then she turned off the break room light. Above her, executives were preparing to decide what Meridian could afford to lose. Downstairs, the woman who emptied their trash had begun counting what they were throwing away. 16 years earlier, Meridian Medical Systems had not occupied 12 floors of glass overlooking the Monongahela River. It occupied half of a converted machine shop in Pittsburgh with a leaking roof, 2 folding tables and a coffee maker that had to be struck on the side before it worked. Grant Whitmore still kept a photograph from those days. In it, he was 36, thinner, exhausted, smiling beside his younger brother Caleb. Grant wore a cheap tie, with his sleeves rolled above his elbows. Caleb wore safety glasses on top of his head and held a screwdriver like a trophy. Behind them, handwritten on a whiteboard, were 3 words: repair before replace. The idea had been Caleb's. The reason for Meridian belonged to both brothers. Their mother, Lorraine Whitmore, had died after complications following emergency surgery at a small community hospital outside Pittsburgh. The doctors had done everything they could. The nurses had done more than anyone should have expected. But the hospital had been underfunded. One aging bedside monitor had failed twice that week. Grant never claimed the equipment failure killed his mother. Life was rarely that simple. What he remembered was helplessness. He remembered a nurse apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. Years later, when Grant had learned business and Caleb had become an electrical engineer, they decided to build monitoring equipment designed for hospitals that couldn't replace entire systems every few years. Grant found investors. Caleb built prototypes. Grant learned how to sell. Caleb learned how to make things last. For years, Caleb spent Friday mornings in the repair bay. When technicians showed him a failed unit, his first question was never, "How much will this cost us?" "This cost us, it was why did it fail?" Then Caleb died. A brain aneurysm at 43, no warning, no final conversation. One morning Grant had a brother. By evening he had a company filled with rooms where Caleb would never walk again. 6 years later, Meridian was larger than either brother had imagined, and Grant rarely visited the repair bay. At 8:10 Wednesday morning, he sat in the 10th floor conference room while Rebecca Sloan displayed a graph on the wall. "Without structural reductions," she said, "we're likely to breach our lending covenant within 2 quarters. Grant rubbed his thumb against the edge of his coffee cup. "How certain enough that I don't want to test it?" Rebecca changed slides. Numbers appeared. Projected savings, labor reductions, third-party servicing, facility consolidation. At the bottom was the figure Grant had seen repeatedly. 11.8 million. 3-year estimated savings. "Outsourcing a repair isn't the only measure," Rebecca said, "but it's the largest controllable expense we can address quickly. And the people 286 positions directly. Some can transfer. How many we don't know yet." Grant looked at her. Rebecca didn't soften the answer. Not enough. Silence settled over the room. Grant stood and walked toward the windows. Below him, cars moved through downtown like pieces on a circuit board. Caleb would hate this. Rebecca closed her laptop halfway. Caleb didn't have to manage Meridian at this size. Grant turned. Rebecca immediately regretted how it sounded. But she didn't withdraw it. "He built this company too," she said more quietly. "I respect that. But if we make decisions for the company Caleb ran 6 years ago, we may destroy the company that exists today." Grant looked back toward the city. Rebecca joined him near the window. "If we lose financing, it won't be 300 jobs." Grant knew the rest. More than 2,000 employees depended directly on Meridian. Suppliers depended on it. Hospitals depended on it. Families depended on it. That was the cruelty of leadership, Grant had discovered. Sometimes everyone in the room could be telling the truth, and someone would still leave hurt. "Prepare the final recommendation," he said. Rebecca nodded. Downstairs, Sadie Price was arriving early for her evening shift. At 9:36 p.m., she reached the repair corridor. Leonard Brooks had a monitor open on his bench. Sadie nodded toward it. "Dead." "That's what the system says." "And what?" Leonard lifted one shoulder. "Ask me in 10 minutes." Sadie continued mopping. 9 minutes later, she heard the familiar startup tone. She looked over. The monitor was working. Leonard held up a small replacement component. Sadie reached automatically toward her pocket. How much? Leonard checked the parts package. 14.72. Sadie's pen stopped. $14.72. Don't forget the 72. That's how they get you. She smiled. Then she wrote 1472. Beside it, she recorded the equipment number. Leonard watched. You really are keeping track. Trying to. You know labor isn't free. I know testing isn't free. I know. Shipping certification warranty. I know, Leonard. He studied her. Then what are you looking for? Sadie considered the question. I don't know yet. She looked toward the scrap pallets. But when I did bookkeeping, my instructor used to say a number doesn't mean much until you know what number is sitting beside it. Leonard leaned back. And what's sitting beside 1472? Sadie glanced at the repaired monitor. I don't know what that machine is worth. Several thousand new. Sadie slowly looked down at the slip. $14.72. Several $1,000s. Neither number proved anything by itself, but the distance between them bothered her. 10 floors above Grant was alone in his office. Rebecca's final recommendation waited on his desk. He turned to the last page. His signature line was marked with a yellow tab. Grant picked up his pen. For a moment he couldn't move. Then he signed. The decision was not final. The board still had to approve it, but his recommendation mattered. Grant set the pen down. As he reached for his briefcase, his eyes landed on the old photograph beside the lamp. 2 brothers. One broken coffee maker, Caleb holding that screwdriver. Behind them, repair before replace. Grant picked up the photograph. For the first time in years, he remembered something Caleb had once said after spending 3 hours repairing a prototype Grant wanted to throw away. You call something worthless when you're tired of understanding why it broke. Grant had laughed then. He didn't laugh now. Far below, Sadie folded another cleaning slip and placed it beside the others. On one side of Meridian, $11.8 million promised survival. On the other, 1472 had brought a discarded machine back to life. Between those 2 numbers were hundreds of people, and neither Grant nor Sadie yet understood who would ultimately be asked to pay the difference. The sound began on Thursday morning. Sadie Price had just finished her shift and was halfway home when the Chevrolet Malibu shuddered beneath her at a red light on 2nd Avenue. Not a small vibration. The whole car jerked. Sadie's hands tightened around the steering wheel. No! The light turned green. She pressed the accelerator. The engine revved, but the Malibu hesitated before moving. Come on, baby. The car finally rolled forward. Sadie drove the remaining 3 miles with the radio off, listening to every mechanical sound. By 8:15, she was standing inside a neighborhood garage, while a mechanic named Earl wiped his hands on a rag. How bad, she asked. Earl exhaled. Transmission slipping. Sadie already disliked the sentence. How much if we're lucky and I can keep it limited to the valve, body, and related work? Maybe 1,200. And if we're unlucky, Earl looked at her. Don't ask me before breakfast. Sadie gave a tired laugh. She didn't have $1,200. She had $463 in emergency savings. The credit card still carried part of last winter's water heater repair, and inside the kitchen at home sat a white envelope labeled Micah College. Sadie thanked Earl and drove home carefully. Micah was at the kitchen table when she entered. He noticed her face immediately. The car Sadie set down her keys. Transmission. How much enough? How much, Mom? She hesitated. 1,200 if we're lucky. Micah leaned back. Neither spoke for a moment. His college brochure sat between them. The following Saturday, his school was taking students to visit 2 campuses in western Pennsylvania. There was a transportation fee, meals, and a small registration charge. Micah looked at the brochure. I don't have to go. Sadie opened the refrigerator. We're not doing this. I can look online. Micah. It'd save money. Sadie closed the refrigerator door. Her son was 17, but in that moment she saw the 6-year-old who had once offered her the $3 in his piggy bank when the electricity bill was overdue. She walked to the table. Listen to me. Micah looked up. Being short on money does not mean you practice giving up your future before it even gets here. It's one college tour. Today. Sadie tapped the brochure. Then it's an application fee. Then books. Then maybe you decide the whole thing costs too much. Mom, we'll fix the car. How, I don't know yet. That answer silenced him. Sadie softened. But we're not paying for it with your future. That evening, the Malibu made it to Meridian. Barely. Sadie parked in the far corner and sat behind the wheel for several seconds after shutting off the engine. Then she went inside and clocked in at 10:06 p.m. She reached the repair corridor. 6 pallets. She had never seen 6 before. Sadie began working, but her eyes kept returning to the disposal labels. Leonard was at his bench. Busy week depends what you call busy. Sadie nodded toward the pallets. That. Leonard followed her gaze. New evaluation procedure is fully active now. What changed time? He set down his screwdriver. We used to have more discretion. If diagnostics took an hour, but I thought a unit was worth saving, I could keep going. And now every additional minute looks bad on somebody's efficiency report. Sadie frowned. So the machine gets thrown away because you're taking too long to figure out how to fix it? Not exactly. Leonard chose his words carefully. The system weighs labor-expected parts, turnaround requirements, replacement value. It's not stupid, but systems like Clean Answers. He pointed toward the pallets. Old machines aren't always clean problems. Later that night, Sadie sat in the break room with her slips. She arranged them by date, then by equipment number. She counted the scrap entries. The number had risen sharply. Sadie found an older slip from several weeks earlier and compared it with the newer ones. She didn't have enough data to prove anything. She knew that. But the change was too large to ignore. The next evening, she decided to ask someone. Monica Hayes, the operations manager, was leaving her office when Sadie approached. Ms. Hayes, Monica stopped. Yes, could I ask you something about the repair area? Monica glanced at the cleaning cart. Sure. Sadie pulled 2 folded slips from her pocket. I've been noticing more equipment going to scrap since the evaluation rules changed. Monica's expression shifted. Not anger, confusion. Why are you tracking equipment? I'm not tracking it officially. I clean that corridor every night, and I started writing down what I saw. She showed Monica the slips. Some of these were repaired for very little. Others were scrapped. I thought maybe somebody should look at the numbers. Monica barely examined them. Sadie, there are analysts who review this. I understand. They have access to actual cost data. I know. Then I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. Sadie paused. Just look. Monica sighed. She wasn't cruel. She was tired late for dinner and thinking about 12 other problems. Sadie, your job is cleaning, not counting. The sentence was delivered gently. That somehow made it worse. Sadie folded the papers. All right. She returned to work. At 1:18 a.m., she stood beside a trash bin in the supply room. The slips were in her hand. Monica was probably right. Sadie had incomplete information. She didn't know labor costs, contracts, depreciation warranties. She was a janitor, writing numbers on discarded paper. For several seconds, she held the slips above the trash. Then she thought about Micah. We're not paying for it with your future. She thought about the monitors. Maybe Meridian was saving money. Maybe the system was completely right. But if it wasn't, someone would pay for the mistake. Sadie lowered her hand. She folded the slips twice and put them back into her pocket. As she did, the brass key on her belt clicked against the metal trash bin. A small sound. Almost nothing. Sadie looked down at it. Then she walked back toward the repair corridor. She wasn't ready to accuse anyone. She wasn't even ready to say she had found a problem. But she was no longer willing to throw the numbers away simply because someone had told her they weren't hers to count. By Monday, nobody had officially announced that Meridian Medical Systems was restructuring. They didn't need to. People could feel it. The repair bay usually filled with radio music arguments about football, and the metallic clatter of tools had become strangely quiet. At 9:18 p.m., Sadie Price entered the corridor with her cleaning cart and noticed Leonard Brooks standing beside his locker. He was removing a photograph from the inside of the door. A little girl with beaded braids smiled from the picture holding a homemade birthday cake. Sadie slowed. You redecorating? Leonard glanced at the photograph. My granddaughter, Nia. I know, she turned 8 last month. Sadie waited. Leonard slid the photograph carefully into his backpack. You taking it home? Figured I should start taking things a little at a time. Sadie understood. She didn't say I'm sorry. Leonard wasn't gone yet. Instead, she asked, You still making that terrible coffee? Leonard looked offended. That coffee has carried this department for 17 years. It tastes like something used to clean an engine. Then stop drinking it. I don't drink it. Exactly. No qualifications. Sadie smiled. For a moment, Leonard did too. Then he closed the locker. Around them, people kept working. Angela Morris, a 32-year-old technician, had taped a drawing from her 5-year-old son above her workstation. She was comparing voltage readings on a circuit board. Across the room, Jerome Ellis was on the phone during his break, reminding his elderly father to take his evening medication. Nobody was sitting around waiting to become a victim. They repaired machines. They completed paperwork. They joked when there was something worth joking about. They simply did all of it beneath a question nobody wanted to say aloud. Would they still have jobs next month? At 9:47, a service request came through. Leonard read it twice. What's wrong, Angela asked. Green Valley Community Hospital, West Virginia. He nodded. Cardiac floor. They need this unit back. A monitor had arrived earlier that afternoon after intermittent shutdowns. Angela checked the service record. System recommends replacement. Leonard looked at the screen. Of course it does. Sadie was emptying a bin nearby. She tried not to listen. She failed. Angela lowered her voice. They're requesting repair specifically. Says replacement isn't in this quarter's budget. Leonard stared at the monitor. How much time do we have courier pickup at 11:30 tomorrow morning? Leonard pulled out a chair. Then we'd better find out what's actually wrong with it. For the next hour, Sadie moved in and out of the corridor. Each time she passed, the monitor was in a different state of disassembly. At 10:32, Leonard was studying a power module. At 10:51, Angela was checking a cable. At 11:06, Leonard called her over. Found you. Sadie stopped her mop. Leonard replaced a small component, reassembled the housing, and connected the test equipment. The screen illuminated. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. No shutdown. Angela ran another test. Still stable. How much? Sadie asked. Leonard looked toward her. She already had a folded slip in her hand. Angela laughed. You're the mysterious accountant Leonard warned us about, unlicensed and underpaid. Leonard checked the component information, 2680. Sadie wrote it down. Angela pointed toward the monitor. Don't get too excited. There's labor testing certification. I know. Sadie had heard the warning enough times. What would replacement cost the hospital? Angela's smile disappeared. Enough that they asked us not to replace it. That answer stayed with Sadie. The following morning, the monitor was packed in protective foam. A shipping label identified Green Valley Community Hospital. Sadie happened to be finishing her shift when Leonard rolled the box toward outbound shipping. She looked at the label. You saved it. Leonard shook his head. I fixed a power problem. Same difference. No. He rested one hand on the box. Important difference. Sadie understood what he meant. Nobody in the repair bay had saved Green Valley Hospital. They had simply given its staff one working machine back. Sometimes that was enough. Upstairs, Grant Whitmore was being asked to make a decision on a much larger scale. Rebecca Sloan placed the final restructuring recommendation in front of him. The board package goes out tonight. Grant turned through the pages. How much exposure if we delay? Every month we maintain the current structure costs us. That's not what I asked. Rebecca studied him. If the lenders react before we demonstrate a credible cost reduction plan, we lose leverage. Grant looked at the projected savings again. $11.8 million. A number clean enough to feel comforting. Any alternative that gets us close. Not quickly. Grant turned to the signature page. His pen hovered. Rebecca remained silent. Finally, Grant signed. She gathered the documents. This isn't easy for anyone, I know. After Rebecca left, Grant remained alone. His office had become dark, except for the desk lamp and the lights of Pittsburgh beyond the windows. He opened a drawer looking for a charger. Instead, his hand touched an old photograph. Grant pulled it out. The workshop. Himself. Caleb. For several seconds, he simply stared. Caleb was grinning at the camera, a screwdriver in his hand. Behind him, barely visible on the whiteboard. Repair before replace. Grant leaned back. The photograph had once sat on his desk. After Caleb died, Grant moved it into the drawer because seeing his brother every morning had become unbearable. Somewhere along the way, unbearable had become forgotten. His phone rang. Grant turned the photograph face down before answering. Yes, downstairs. Sadie was beginning another shift. Near the loading area, she saw the Green Valley package waiting for pickup. A handwritten note had been taped to the top by Angela. Tested ready for service. Sadie ran one finger over the edge of the box. $26.80. Again, she knew that wasn't the real cost. Labor mattered. Testing mattered. Shipping mattered. Everything had a cost. But that was precisely what bothered her. Meridian savings didn't make costs disappear. They moved them. If the repair department closed a hospital like Green Valley might pay more. Patients might wait longer. Technicians here might lose paychecks. Families might lose health insurance. Sadie thought about her Malibu. One transmission repair could rearrange her entire month. What could one lost paycheck rearrange a mortgage? A prescription, a child's college application? Maybe Meridian had no choice. Sadie was willing to believe that. But somebody should at least know where the cost went. At 12:03 a.m., she passed Leonard's locker again. The photograph of Naya was gone. So was his old Pittsburgh Steelers mug. Only a pale circle remained where the mug had sat for years. Sadie stopped. For the first time, the restructuring no longer looked like $11.8 million. It looked like an empty spot on a shelf. 10 floors above, Grant ended his call and opened the drawer again. He took Caleb's photograph out. This time he didn't put it back. He placed it beside the restructuring proposal. Then he stared at the signature he had already written. For the first time since approving the recommendation, Grant Whitmore wondered whether saving Meridian and protecting what Meridian had been built to do might no longer be the same thing. On Wednesday evening, a yellow notice appeared on the metal door beside Meridian's repair bay. Storage Area B, clear by Friday. Sadie Price read it while filling her mop bucket. Storage Area B was barely a room. It was a narrow space packed with obsolete manuals, broken shelving, cardboard boxes, and equipment nobody had touched in years. At 10:14 p.m., Monica Hayes handed Sadie a work order. Facilities is clearing that room tomorrow. Can you clean it tonight? Sure. Anything marked disposal can go. Sadie took the sheet. The irony wasn't lost on her. Lately, Meridian seemed very interested in deciding what was worth keeping. Inside Storage Area B, dust coated everything. Sadie opened boxes swept behind shelving and separated obvious trash. Near the back wall stood an old steel cabinet. Its paint was scratched. One handle was bent. A strip of masking tape had once been attached across the front, but only a yellowed corner remained. Sadie tried the handle. Locked. She checked the maintenance ring supplied by Meridian. None of the keys worked. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she touched the small brass key hanging with her personal keys. Darius's key. Sadie smiled at herself. Don't be ridiculous. She tried it anyway. The key slid into the lock. Sadie's smile disappeared. She turned it. Click. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she opened the cabinet. No money. No hidden company records. No secret that would change her life. Just tools. Old screwdrivers. A soldering iron. Coiled cables. Several technical manuals. Small plastic drawers filled with components too outdated for Meridian's current products. Sadie almost laughed. Of course, Darius's mysterious key opened a cabinet full of things he would have refused to throw away. She began removing the contents. Then she noticed a faded label attached inside the door. 3 words had been written by hand. Repair before replace. Sadie stopped. She had heard something similar from Leonard. She found him at his workbench 20 minutes later. You know anything about that old cabinet in storage? B. Leonard looked up. What cabinet steel? Gray, bent handle. His expression changed. You got it open. Sadie held up the brass key. Leonard stared. Well, I'll be damned. Apparently my husband has been trespassing from beyond the grave. Leonard laughed and followed her. The moment he saw the cabinet, he became quiet. I haven't seen this in years. You know it? No, it. Leonard touched the door. This was Caleb's. Caleb Whitmore Grant's brother. Sadie looked again at the handwritten words. Leonard picked up an old screwdriver. When Meridian was still small, Caleb spent half his life down here. The founder worked in repair. He didn't think of it as repair. He called it education. Sadie leaned against the shelf. What does that mean? When something came back broken, Caleb wanted to know why. Leonard turned the screwdriver in his fingers. He'd come down every Friday morning. Didn't matter how busy he was. What did he ask? Same thing every time. Leonard smiled faintly. Why did it fail? Sadie waited. Not what did it cost. Oh, he cared about cost. Grant especially cared about cost. That's why the brothers worked well together. Leonard replaced the screwdriver. But Caleb believed a broken machine could teach you something a new one couldn't. Sadie looked toward the open cabinet. What happened after he died, Leonard's expression changed. Grant kept coming down for a while, and then company got bigger. Problems got bigger. Meetings multiplied. He shrugged. Eventually the reports went upstairs, and the people stayed down here. That sentence followed Sadie home. At 7:20 the next morning, she sat at the kitchen table while Micah ate toast before school. Her cleaning slips were spread in front of her. He stopped chewing. What is all that work? You clean medical equipment now? No? Then why are you doing math at 7 in the morning? Sadie continued adding figures. Micah pulled out the chair opposite her. Mom. She finally looked up. What? Why do you care? Sadie glanced at the papers. It was a fair question. Nobody had asked her to collect the numbers. Monica had effectively told her to stop. She wasn't getting paid extra. And in a few hours she needed to call Earl about the Malibu. Sadie picked up one slip. Because people keep throwing things away. Micah frowned. So if something gets thrown away, somebody should know what it was worth. Micah looked at her for a moment. Are we talking about machines? Sadie almost answered immediately. Then she stopped. I think so. Micah smiled slightly. You're weird. Get to school. That evening, Sadie returned to storage area B. Facilities had already removed most of the contents. The old cabinet stood empty. She touched the brass key. For 9 years she had carried it because it belonged to Darius. She had never known what it opened. Maybe Darius himself had forgotten. He had repaired dozens of buildings and collected old keys constantly. The coincidence should have meant nothing. But standing before the empty cabinet, Sadie remembered his voice. A key is only useful when someone remembers what it opens. She closed the cabinet door. Across the corridor, Leonard was repairing another monitor. Beyond him, pallets marked scrap waited under fluorescent lights. Above them were 10 floors of offices where people were preparing to decide whether Leonard's department had a future. Sadie suddenly understood something that had nothing to do with the brass key. Meridian's problem wasn't simply that executives didn't care. Grant Whitmore probably cared deeply. Rebecca Sloan probably cared. Monica probably cared. But caring from 10 floors away was different from seeing. The people deciding what could be discarded no longer stood close enough to watch what happened after the decision. At 11:03 p.m., Grant Whitmore stepped out of an elevator near the repair level. Sadie saw him from the far end of the corridor. Grant stopped before the glass doors. Inside, Leonard and Angela worked beneath bright lamps. For a moment, Grant simply watched. Then his phone rang. He checked the screen. His shoulders tightened. Grant answered and turned back toward the elevator. Sadie watched the doors close behind him. He had been less than 20 feet from Leonard. One pane of glass between them, one door, and he had not crossed it. Sadie's fingers closed around the brass key. Sometimes she thought the hardest doors to open weren't locked at all. By Thursday morning, everyone in Meridian's repair department knew Friday was coming. Nobody needed to explain what Friday meant. At 8:30 a.m., Grant Whitmore sat across from Rebecca Sloan while rain clouds gathered beyond the 10th floor windows. Rebecca slid a document toward him. The lender called again. Grant didn't touch it. And they want evidence that the board is prepared to act. We are acting. They want something measurable. Grant leaned back. So 300 jobs. Rebecca's expression tightened. Don't do that. Do what reduce the entire plan to the part that hurts most. Grant looked at her. Isn't that what we're asking everyone downstairs not to do? Rebecca was silent for a moment. Then she opened her laptop. If we don't reduce structural costs, we risk the credit facility. If that happens, suppliers tighten terms. Cash pressure increases. Investment freezes. She turned the screen toward him. Meridian employs more than 2,000 people. I'm trying to protect them, too. Grant knew she meant it. That made the decision harder. Rebecca wasn't a villain hiding greed behind spreadsheets. She had spent 15 years at Meridian. She knew employees by name. She had once personally fought to preserve health benefits during a difficult acquisition. But numbers had boundaries. Compassion did not erase them. Tomorrow at 9, Rebecca said the board votes. Grant looked toward the city. I know. That afternoon, Leonard Brooks took his old Steelers mug home. Sadie noticed the empty circle it left on the shelf when she arrived for her shift. By 8:45 p.m., she had decided to try once more. She found Monica Hayes near the operations office. Miss Hayes' Monica looked tired. Yes, Sadie. About those numbers I showed you. Monica closed her eyes briefly. Sadie, I'm not asking you to believe them. That stopped her. I just want somebody who understands the real data to compare them. Monica studied Sadie's face. Maybe she heard something different this time. All right. She took the folded slips. 20 minutes later, Sadie was standing beside the desk of an operations analyst named Trevor Lane. Trevor spread 3 slips beneath his monitor. So these are equipment IDs. Yes. And you collected them how I wrote down what I saw in the corridor I clean. From what system, no system. Trevor looked up. You don't have repair disposition? Data numbered labor hours? Number warranty status? No contract terms? No. He leaned back. Sadie could already feel the answer coming. These aren't usable for analysis. They're real numbers. I'm not saying they're fake. Trevor pushed the slips gently toward her. I'm saying they're incomplete. Sadie looked at them. What if they're pointing at something? Then we'd need an approved data set to establish it. Could you check? Trevor glanced at his screen. I have 3 reports due before tomorrow's board meeting. It wasn't cruel. That was becoming a pattern. Nobody insulted Sadie. Nobody shouted. Nobody tore up her papers. They simply had more important things to do. All right, she said. Sadie folded the slips and returned them to her pocket. At 10:11, she reached the repair bay. Leonard was placing tools into a cardboard box. Sadie stopped. You leaving early, number? Then why are you packing? Leonard lifted a pair of pliers. Bought these in 1999. He placed them inside. Figured if tomorrow goes the way everyone expects, I don't want to carry 25 years of my life out in a garbage bag. Sadie leaned against her cart. You don't know what's going to happen. I've been around long enough to know when management starts using the word transition. He picked up a small screwdriver. Nia asked me yesterday if I'd still take her to school if I lost my job. What did you say? I told her yes. Leonard smiled without humor. Didn't tell her I'd probably be taking her because I'd have nowhere else to go. Sadie looked toward the box. You'll find something. At 58, you can repair a $5,000 monitor with an $18 connector. Apparently, the market values PowerPoint more. Sadie almost smiled. Almost. Across the room, Angela was still working. Jerome was labeling repaired equipment. Nobody had stopped doing their jobs because the company might stop needing them tomorrow. That dignity hurt more than panic would have. At 10:43, the elevator at the end of the corridor opened. Grant Whitmore stepped out. Sadie recognized him immediately. She had cleaned his office hundreds of times, though they had exchanged perhaps 4 sentences in 6 years. Grant walked toward the repair bay. No entourage, no Rebecca, no board members, just Grant. He slowed near the glass doors. Inside, Leonard bent over a monitor beneath his work lamp. Angela crossed behind him carrying a parts tray. Jerome laughed at something another technician said. Grant stood there watching. Sadie stopped moving. For one hopeful second, she thought he was going inside. His hand even moved toward the door. Then his phone rang. Grant looked at the screen. Sadie saw his expression change. Whitmore. He turned away. No, don't move the facility. I'm coming upstairs. The elevator doors opened. Grant stepped inside. Gone. Leonard never saw him. Sadie stared at the closed elevator. 20 feet. That was all. 20 feet and a glass door separated the man deciding whether this department should exist from the people whose lives would change if it didn't. Sadie touched the brass key clipped to her belt. The door hadn't been locked. That was the part she couldn't stop thinking about. At 11:32, Leonard sealed his box but left it beneath the bench. You taking it tonight? Sadie asked. He shook his head. Tomorrow. He switched off his work lamp. If I need to. Sadie watched him walk away. Then she looked at the slips in her hand. For a moment she considered leaving them on Grant's desk. She didn't. That wasn't her place and she knew it. Instead, she folded them carefully and returned them to her uniform pocket. Outside, the first drops of cold rain struck the building's glass walls. Tomorrow morning the board would decide. And somewhere between Sadie's incomplete numbers and Rebecca's polished projections was the truth. The problem was that nobody with enough power to find it had stopped long enough to look. By 11:40 Thursday night, the rain had swallowed most of Pittsburgh. Water streamed down Meridian Medical Systems' glass walls, bending the city lights into long, trembling streaks. From the 10th floor, bridges across the Monongahela looked almost unreal beneath the storm. Sadie Price should not have been up there. Her section was normally finished by 11. But Marlene, another janitor on the night crew, had received a call from home just after 9. Her 7-year-old daughter had a fever of 103. Go, Sadie had told her. What about 10? I'll take it. You already have 9. Then I'll have 10 too. So at 11:52, Sadie pushed her cleaning cart from the service elevator onto the executive floor. Most offices were dark. The boardroom had already been prepared for the morning meeting. Water glasses stood upside down beside leather folders. 12 chairs surrounded the long, walnut table. At 9 o'clock, people would sit in those chairs and decide what Meridian could afford to keep. Sadie began emptying wastebaskets. At 12:09, she entered Grant Whitmore's office. Empty. His desk lamp was still on. Beside it sat the old photograph Sadie had noticed while dusting earlier that week, 2 younger men inside a workshop, one holding a screwdriver. She recognized Grant. The other had to be Caleb. Sadie didn't touch it. She emptied the trash and moved on. At 12:17, she heard something near the executive lounge. At first, she thought it was the ventilation system. Then she heard it again. A human sound. Sadie stopped pushing the cart. Near the windows, almost hidden by darkness, Grant Whitmore sat in a low chair. His jacket had been thrown across another seat. His tie hung loose around his collar. Several pages from the restructuring proposal lay on the carpet. His phone rested face down beside them. Grant had one hand pressed against his mouth. Sadie saw the tears before he noticed her. She immediately lowered her eyes. There were moments a person had no right to take simply because they happened in public. Sadie quietly turned her cart around. Don't. She stopped. Grant wiped his face. Don't leave because of me. Sadie kept one hand on the cart. I can come back. Grant gave a short, humorless laugh. It's your building more than mine at this hour. Sadie said nothing. Rain struck the windows. Grant stared across the city. My brother and I started this company because our mother died in a hospital that didn't have enough. Sadie looked toward him. She knew some of the story now from Leonard, but she let Grant tell it. We thought if we built equipment that lasted longer, hospitals like hers wouldn't always have to choose what they could afford to replace. He swallowed. Caleb believed you could learn something from everything that broke. Grant looked down at the papers. Tomorrow I'm asking the board to approve closing the department that probably represents that belief more than anything else left in this building. Sadie glanced at the scattered pages. You don't have to explain it to me, Mr. Whitmore. Maybe I do. Grant looked at her. Sadie continued quietly. Maybe you just need to hear yourself say it. That landed differently. Grant leaned back. The bank wants cost reductions. Rebecca's projections are sound. If we don't act and financing tightens, I could put the whole company at risk. Sadie listened. 300 people may lose their jobs if we approve this. His voice cracked slightly. If we don't, maybe 2,000 people eventually do. He looked at her with the exhaustion of a man who had spent too long trying to turn pain into arithmetic. What do you do when every choice hurts someone? Sadie didn't know Meridian's balance sheet. She didn't understand lending covenants. She had never sat in a board meeting. But she knew choices. She knew standing in a grocery aisle calculating whether laundry detergent could wait until Friday. She knew what $1,200 of transmission work could do to a household. She knew what happened when one person's efficiency became another person's emergency. Her eyes moved toward the proposal near Grant's shoes. Then she said 6 words. Then ask who pays for it. Grant stared at her. Sadie didn't explain. She didn't tell him which decision to make. She didn't say he was wrong. She simply reached for the spray bottle on her cart. Grant looked down at the papers again. Who pays for it? He repeated. Sadie began wiping a nearby table. After a long silence, Grant asked, What's your name? She looked at him. Sadie Price. He nodded. Sadie. It was strange hearing the CEO say it. She moved toward the corridor. As the cart crossed the carpet seam, something slipped from her uniform pocket. A folded cleaning slip. Sadie didn't notice. Grant did. Sadie. She turned. He picked up the paper. When he unfolded it, his expression changed. Rows of handwritten numbers covered both sides. Equipment IDs, dates, repair, scrap, 1814-72, 2680. What are these? Sadie walked back. For 1 second, Monica's words returned. Your job is cleaning, not counting. Sadie could have said nothing. Instead, she answered. Things people were throwing away. Grant looked at the slip again. What does 1472 mean? A part Leonard used to repair a monitor that had already been marked for scrap. Leonard Brooks. Yes. Grant's eyes moved across the other entries. How long have you been doing this? A few weeks. Why? Sadie hesitated. Because the pile kept getting bigger. Grant looked up. Have you shown anyone I tried? And they said the numbers were incomplete. Are they yes? The answer surprised him. Sadie continued. I don't know labor costs, contracts, warranty status. Half the things your analysts know I probably don't even know to ask about. Then why keep them? Sadie looked at the paper. Because incomplete isn't the same as meaningless. Grant became very still. For the first time that night, something other than grief appeared on his face. Attention. He unfolded the slip completely. Do you have more? Sadie touched her pocket. Yes. How many? But a lot. Grant looked toward the dark boardroom, then toward the elevator, then back at the numbers. At 12:31 a.m., the restructuring proposal still lay scattered beside his chair. But Grant Whitmore was no longer looking at it. He was looking at a cleaning slip written by a woman his company had never invited into the room. And for the first time, he was asking whether the people deciding what Meridian could afford to lose had been measuring the wrong cost. Sadie Price slept for 2 hours and 41 minutes. At 3:06 a.m., she had driven home through wet streets with Grant Whitmore's questions still circling in her mind. "Do you have more? How many?" She had shown him 12 folded cleaning slips before leaving Meridian. Grant had photographed each one with his phone, then handed them back. He had not promised anything. He had not told her she was right. He had simply said, "Thank you, Sadie." Somehow that made her more nervous. At 7:12, Micah found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with untouched coffee. "You okay, fine? You look like you lost a fight with Tuesday. It's Friday. That explains why you lost." Sadie almost smiled. Micah opened the refrigerator. "You're supposed to be sleeping." "I know." He noticed the folded slips beside her. "Did something happen?" Sadie looked at him. "I talked to the CEO." Micah slowly closed the refrigerator. "You what?" He asked me a question. What kind of question? A complicated one. And I gave him a simple answer. Micah stared at her. "Mom, that somehow makes me more worried." Sadie gathered the slips. "Go to school." At 3:48 that afternoon, the Malibu hesitated twice before starting. Sadie whispered a prayer she wasn't sure counted as one, and drove toward Meridian. The board meeting had begun at 9 that morning. She had spent the entire day wondering what happened. By 5:51 p.m., she was in uniform. At 6:03, her supervisor, Thomas, hurried into the supply room. "Sadie." She turned. Thomas looked uncomfortable. "There's someone looking for you." Her stomach tightened. "Who?" He lowered his voice. "Executive office." Sadie didn't move. Thomas swallowed. "The board wants you upstairs." For several seconds, all she heard was the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Micah, rent, the Malibu, $18.40 an hour. Her hand moved automatically toward the brass key on her belt. Did they say why no? Sadie removed her rubber gloves. She wiped her palms against her uniform. Then she walked toward the elevator. She had ridden the executive elevator hundreds of times while cleaning. This was the first time she entered without a mop. When the doors opened on 10, a woman from Grant's office was waiting. Mrs. Price Sadie wasn't used to hearing that on this floor. "Yes, right this way." The boardroom doors opened. 12 people sat around the walnut table. Rebecca Sloan was near Grant. Monica Hayes sat against the wall with 2 operations staff members. Trevor Lane, the analyst who had dismissed Sadie's notes, was there too. His expression was unreadable. Grant stood. "Sadie, thank you for coming." She nodded. Nobody mentioned midnight. Nobody mentioned tears. Grant didn't expose the most vulnerable moment Sadie had ever witnessed from him. Instead, he picked up one cleaning slip. "Mrs. Price, what have you been counting?" Sadie looked around the room. "I wouldn't call it counting exactly." A gray-haired board member leaned forward. "What would you call it noticing?" Sadie reached into her pocket and placed the folded slips on the table. She explained the pallets, the disposal stickers, Leonard's repairs, the $18 connector, the 1472 component. The Green Valley monitor repaired because the hospital couldn't afford replacement. Rebecca listened without interrupting. Another director examined a slip. Where did these figures come from? Things I could see while doing my job. Equipment labels, disposal markings, parts Leonard mentioned. "So you accessed no internal database?" "No, sir." "No confidential financial records?" "No." "Do you know whether these devices were under warranty?" "No." "Do you know their depreciated book value average labor allocation?" "No." He looked toward Grant. "With respect, this isn't data." Sadie felt every eye turn toward her. She could have defended herself. Instead, she nodded. "He's right." The room became quiet. Rebecca looked up. Sadie continued. "My numbers aren't complete." Grant watched her closely. "I don't know enough to tell you whether outsourcing is right or wrong. I don't know enough to tell you whether these machines should all have been repaired." She placed one finger on the slips. "But I know these equipment numbers are real. I know some were marked scrap. And I know some worked after people downstairs repaired them." Trevor shifted in his chair. Sadie looked toward him. If the real data says none of that matters, then it doesn't matter. She paused. But somebody should check. An older woman near the end of the table, board member Helen Ward, picked up the slip containing the Green Valley Equipment ID. Can we verify this unit? Trevor opened his laptop. It may take some time. How much, depending on archived service records? Try, Trevor typed. The room waited. Sadie stood beside the table, suddenly conscious of a bleach stain near the bottom of her uniform. After several minutes, Trevor stopped. I have it. Rebecca turned. Well, Unit 7814, initially recommended for replacement, and final disposition repaired, with Trevor read the screen. Power regulation component. Helen glanced at Sadie's slip. Cost. Trevor hesitated. $26.80 for the component. Sadie's number, exactly. Nobody spoke. Rebecca leaned toward the laptop. What about total service cost? Higher, obviously. How much? Trevor searched, still calculating. Helen picked up another slip. Check this one. Then another. The second equipment number matched. So did the third. Not every entry meant a machine should have been repaired. Sadie had never claimed that, but the observations were real. Helen removed her glasses. I want a sample audit before we eliminate an entire operational function, one director objected. We have a lender deadline. We also have a fiduciary responsibility not to approve savings based on incomplete assumptions. Rebecca looked at Grant. Grant remained silent for a moment. Then he said 72 hours. Another director shook his head. Grant, 72 hours, he repeated. Finance operations repair. Validate replacement cost labor assumptions, shipping warranty exposure, and downstream service impact. He looked at Rebecca. Can you do it? She took a breath. Yes. Grant turned towards the board. Then I move we postpone the vote. Helen seconded. The vote passed narrowly. Sadie stood motionless. She had expected to lose her job. Instead, a multi-million-dollar decision had just been delayed because someone had finally agreed to check the trash. Grant walked her to the door. Sadie. She turned. You didn't tell them about last night? No, thank you. Grant glanced back towards the boardroom. That conversation wasn't theirs. Sadie nodded. Then Grant looked at the slips in her hand. But those numbers are... The doors closed behind her. Sadie walked toward the elevator. She was still a janitor. Her paycheck had not changed. Her car was still failing. Her son's college envelope still contained only what she could afford to put inside. Nothing about her life had magically transformed. But as the elevator descended, Sadie looked at her reflection in the polished doors. For 6 years, she had entered that boardroom only after everyone else had left. Tonight, they had waited for her to speak. And somewhere below, Leonard Brooks still had a cardboard box beneath his workbench. For at least 72 more hours, he wouldn't have to carry it home. The first thing Rebecca Sloan did after the board meeting was erase $11.8 million from the conference room whiteboard. Not because the number was wrong. Not yet. But because she no longer trusted it enough to leave it standing alone. By 7:20 Friday evening, Meridian had assembled a temporary review team in a second-floor conference room. Finance, operations, procurement. 2 repair technicians, 1 service coordinator, Trevor Lane, and after Rebecca personally requested him, Leonard Brooks. Leonard arrived carrying the same cardboard box he had packed the night before. Rebecca looked at it. Planning to leave early, Leonard set it beneath his chair, planning for options. Rebecca almost smiled. Then she opened her laptop. We have 72 hours. The room went to work. Sadie Price was not invited. That surprised some people when word spread through the building. It didn't surprise Sadie. She had never claimed she could perform the audit. She had pointed at something. Now people trained to understand it had to determine whether it was real. At 9:12 p.m., Sadie was wiping fingerprints from the glass outside the conference room when Leonard stepped out. You caused me a weekend of overtime. You're welcome. He held up a paper cup. And Rebecca's coffee is worse than mine. That I don't believe. Leonard leaned closer. Your numbers are matching. Sadie stopped wiping. How many enough to make people nervous? Then he returned inside. By midnight, the team had traced 42 devices from Sadie's slips. Some had been correctly scrapped. Water damage, obsolete hardware, unsafe components. Sadie had expected that, but others raised questions. Units flagged for replacement had later been repaired successfully when technicians used discretion. Devices categorized as economically unrepairable were being compared against internal labor costs without fully accounting for what replacement meant downstream. On Saturday morning, Rebecca stood before a spreadsheet that had grown considerably more complicated. Shipping understated, Trevor said. By how much? Still calculating. Hospital downtime. A service coordinator answered. Not included consistently. Rebecca looked toward Leonard. And refurbishment value. Leonard folded his arms. You weren't counting it. Rebecca's jaw tightened. I'm aware of that now. Leonard could have enjoyed the moment. He didn't. You want the truth? Yes. The old system wasn't perfect either. Rebecca looked surprised. We spent too long on some repairs. Inventory was messy. Some parts sat on shelves for years. So restructuring is necessary. I didn't say it wasn't. Leonard pointed toward the spreadsheet. I said, closing the department isn't the same thing as fixing it. That sentence reached Grant Whitmore before noon. He was in his office reading the interim findings. The $11.8 million estimate had not vanished. It had fractured. Savings remained. So did costs. Costs that had previously lived somewhere outside the model. Replacement purchases by hospitals. Additional freight. Service delays. Lost refurbishment revenue. Warranty consequences. And human knowledge that had never appeared on a balance sheet. Grant stared at the pages. Sadie's 6 words returned. Then ask who pays for it. The answer was becoming uncomfortable. Everyone, just in different places. At 2:15 Saturday afternoon, Grant took the elevator to the repair floor. His phone rang before the doors opened. He looked at the screen. The lender. For several seconds he watched the name flash. Then he silenced it. The repair bay doors stood ahead. This time, Grant opened them. Conversation softened when he entered. Leonard was at a bench with Angela Morris. Grant approached. Leonard. Grant. 25 years at Meridian had earned Leonard the right not to call him Mr. Whitmore. Grant looked at the monitor between them. What are you working on? Leonard seemed almost suspicious of the question. Intermittent signal loss. Repairable, probably. How do you know? Leonard looked at him. I don't yet. Grant nodded. That answer mattered. He pulled over a chair. Show me. For the next 40 minutes, the CEO of Meridian Medical Systems sat beneath fluorescent lights while Leonard explained things no board presentation had shown him. Failure patterns, parts availability, technician judgment, when repair made sense, when it didn't, why experience could recognize a fault before software did. Grant asked questions. Then he did something harder. He stopped asking and listened. At one point, Leonard opened a drawer containing obsolete connectors. Caleb used to hate these. Grant smiled faintly. He hated everything that couldn't be labeled properly. He hated my labeling. Your labeling was terrible. Leonard laughed. For a second, Grant heard his brother in the room. Then Leonard's expression softened. He came down here every Friday. I know, no. Leonard looked directly at him. I don't think you did anymore. Grant didn't defend himself. That was the moment Sadie saw them. She was pushing her cart along the corridor when she noticed Grant inside the repair bay. No phone against his ear. No executive waiting behind him. He was sitting beside Leonard. Sadie kept moving. She had work to do. At 11:06 Sunday night, the preliminary audit was finished. The original outsourcing model could no longer support its headline savings without major qualification. But the news was not entirely comforting. Meridian still had a financial problem. Repair operations still needed reform. Labor costs were still high. Inventory practices still needed improvement. There would be no magical return to the old days. Grant understood that. For the first time, however, he also understood that preserving the repair department did not have to mean preserving it unchanged. Monday morning, the board would meet again. At 12:22 a.m., Sadie was finishing the executive hallway when Grant emerged from the elevator. He looked exhausted. Sadie stepped aside with her cart. Long weekend, Grant almost laughed. You could say that. He walked past, then stopped. Sadie expected another question. Instead, Grant turned. Good night, Sadie. Not ma'am, not excuse me. Not the vague nod people gave the woman emptying their trash. Sadie. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. Grant continued toward his office. Sadie watched him go for only a second before returning to the floor. Her name did not solve Meridian's problems. Neither did her numbers. But 10 floors below Leonard's cardboard box was still beneath his bench. And for the first time in years, the people deciding Meridian's future had crossed the glass door to ask the people repairing its machines what they could see. At 8:57 Monday morning, Leonard Brooks's cardboard box was still beneath his workbench. 3 minutes later, Meridian's board meeting began. Sadie Price was on the 6th floor cleaning a conference room. She knew the vote was happening. She also knew there was nothing more she could do about it. That realization felt strangely peaceful. For weeks, she had carried numbers in her pocket because nobody else seemed interested in them. Now the numbers were upstairs with people who understood contracts, financing labor costs, and hospital service agreements. Sadie had opened the question. Someone else had to answer it. On the 10th floor, Rebecca Sloan stood beside a screen. The famous $11.8 million figure was gone. In its place was a more complicated projection. The original outsourcing model overstated net savings, she said. No one interrupted. Third-party servicing still reduces certain direct costs, but after accounting for replacement exposure, freight service delays, refurbishment value, and revised warranty assumptions, the financial advantage narrows substantially. A director near the center of the table asked substantially meaning I no longer recommend full outsourcing. Grant Whitmore watched Rebecca. That admission had cost her something. Not her job, her pride. Rebecca had built the original model. Now she was dismantling part of it herself. What do you recommend? Helen Ward asked. Rebecca changed slides, restructuring. The doors opened. Leonard entered with Angela Morris and 2 operations staff members. Leonard looked profoundly uncomfortable in a boardroom. Grant gestured toward an empty chair. Sit. I've been standing at work for 25 years. Then consider this a benefit. A few people smiled. Leonard sat. Rebecca continued. The repair department would not remain unchanged. Inventory had to be reduced. Diagnostic procedures needed revision. Turnaround targets had to become more realistic without returning to inefficiency. Then Leonard presented the idea the technicians and finance team had developed together. A refurbishment and field service division. Meridian could repair qualifying returned equipment, certify it, and offer it to smaller hospitals at lower cost than new units. Instead of treating every old device as a liability, some could become inventory. Instead of measuring the repair team only by what it cost Meridian, the company could measure what it produced. What kind of revenue, one director asked. Rebecca answered, Conservative first-year estimate is modest, so this doesn't solve our financing problem. No, Grant said. Everyone looked toward him, and I think that's important. He stood. There is no single decision that solves our financing problem. Grant glanced toward the rain-streaked windows. For the last month I've been looking for one. He turned back. Close one department. Remove one large cost. Show one clean number to the lenders. He looked toward Rebecca. She gave me the information I asked for. Rebecca met his eyes. The failure was mine. Grant placed his hand on the original restructuring packet. My mistake wasn't looking at spreadsheets. He paused. My mistake was only looking at spreadsheets. Nobody moved. I stopped going downstairs. Leonard lowered his eyes. I stopped asking technicians why things failed. I stopped asking shipping what replacement actually meant. I stopped asking service teams what hospitals experienced after our decisions left this building. Grant took a breath. We became efficient at measuring what happened inside Meridian. Then he remembered Sadie's words. And careless about asking who paid outside it. The board eventually approved the revised plan. Not unanimously, not easily. Some positions would change. A small number would still be eliminated through consolidation and attrition. Nobody pretended otherwise. But the repair department would survive. More than 200 jobs originally marked for elimination would remain, while others would move into the new refurbishment and field service structure. At 11:46 a.m., Leonard returned downstairs. The cardboard box was still waiting. Sadie found him unpacking it. She leaned against her cleaning cart. Bad news. Leonard placed his Steelers mug back on the shelf. Terrible. Sadie raised an eyebrow. They're keeping me. My condolences. I had retirement all planned. You packed one screwdriver and a coffee mug. I live simply. Leonard took Nia's photograph from his backpack and returned it to the locker. Sadie smiled. That could have been the end of it. It wasn't. At 4:30 that afternoon, Sadie was asked upstairs again. This time she was less afraid. Only slightly. Grant, Rebecca, Monica, and Helen Ward were waiting in a smaller conference room. Grant gestured toward a chair. Sadie sat. We're creating something, he said. Sadie looked at Rebecca. Rebecca explained. A frontline review council. Employees from manufacturing, repair shipping, client support, cafeteria operations, and janitorial services would meet monthly. Once each quarter, the council would bring operational concerns directly before a board committee. We'd like you on it, Grant said. Sadie stared at him. Why, Grant almost smiled. I think that's obvious. No, sir. The smile disappeared. Sadie folded her hands. If you want me there because I'm the janitor who found some numbers, and it makes a nice company story, I'm not interested. Monica looked startled. Rebecca leaned back slightly. Grant simply asked, What would make you interested? Sadie considered it. Can the council actually put something on the board agenda? We haven't defined that yet. Then define it. Helen Ward smiled faintly. Sadie continued. Otherwise people talk. Somebody takes notes, everybody gets thanked, and nothing has to happen. Grant glanced at Helen. Helen said 1 agenda item per quarter. Guaranteed review. Rebecca added, provided the council documents the issue. Sadie nodded. That sounds real. Grant looked at her. So you'll do it? Sadie thought about Leonard's empty shelf. The Green Valley monitor, Micah's college envelope. The glass door Grant had finally crossed. Yes. Grant extended his hand. Sadie shook it. She left the conference room 10 minutes later with no promotion, no check, no miraculous change in her bank account. At 6:02 p.m., she clocked in for her regular janitorial shift. But something had changed. For years, Sadie had carried keys to rooms where decisions were made, only so she could enter after everyone important had gone home. Now, for the first time, one of those rooms would have a chair waiting for her before the meeting began. And Sadie had made certain that chair came with a voice. 2 weeks after the board rejected full outsourcing, Grant Whitmore asked Sadie Price to meet him at 4 in the afternoon. Sadie arrived wearing her Navy janitorial uniform because her shift began in less than 2 hours. Grant noticed. You could have come before work. I did. He smiled. Right. On the table between them sat a folder. Sadie looked at it suspiciously. I've had enough folders from this floor. This one isn't about restructuring. Grant opened it. Inside was information about Meridian's professional development program. I heard you studied bookkeeping. Sadie looked at him. Who told you you did? When you explained why you started counting equipment, Sadie had forgotten. Grant continued. 3 semesters almost. Why didn't you finish? My husband got sick. Grant's expression softened. Darius Sadie was surprised he remembered the name. Yes. And after I had Micah. She shrugged. Life kept charging tuition even when school didn't. Grant turned the folder toward her. Let Meridian pay for you to finish. Sadie didn't touch it. Grant continued. We could also create a position in operations, something that uses what you're already good at. There was a time when Sadie might have imagined this exact moment as rescue. A powerful man sees her. A door opens. Everything changes. But sitting there, she felt something else. Unease. What position? We'd design it. For me, yes. Why? Grant hesitated. Because you've demonstrated value. I demonstrated that I notice things. That's valuable. It is. Sadie folded her hands. But if you create a job because I happen to say 6 words to you at midnight, what happens to the next janitor who notices something? Grant became quiet. Sadie pushed the folder back. I don't want a thank you job. That's not what this is. I know you don't mean it that way. She looked at him steadily. But I want to know I can do the work before somebody gives me the title. Grant leaned back. What do you want? Sadie thought about it. Who qualifies for tuition assistance? Most full-time employees. Most. Grant's expression changed. He reached for his phone, then stopped. I don't know, that might be worth finding out. The answer came at the next Frontline Review Council meeting. Hourly employees in several support classifications technically had access to limited educational assistance, but the eligibility rules were narrow. Many janitorial and cafeteria workers were excluded unless their coursework directly matched their existing job classification. Keisha Morgan listened from the cafeteria representative's seat. So if I want to study supply chain management, she asked, the company won't help because I serve food. Rebecca Sloan looked at the policy. That appears to be correct. Keisha blinked. That makes no sense. No, Rebecca admitted. It doesn't. Sadie said nothing. She didn't need to. The council's first formal recommendation went to the board that quarter. Expand tuition assistance to all qualifying full-time employees pursuing accredited programs connected to positions within Meridian. The proposal passed. Not because Sadie needed school, because hundreds of employees might. 3 weeks later, Sadie sat at her kitchen table with an online application open on Micah's laptop. Community College of Allegheny County. Accounting certificate. Micah leaned over her shoulder. You nervous? No. You've reread your address 4 times. Quality control. You've lived here 11 years. Exactly. I'm very confident about the address. Micah laughed. Sadie looked at the submit button. For a moment she thought about Darius, about hospital rooms, funeral bills, night shifts, years in which survival had always seemed more urgent than becoming anything new. Then she clicked, submitted. Micah lifted both hands. My mother's going to college. Your mother is going to community college. Still college. Your mother also needs to sleep before work. But she was smiling. The following months were exhausting. Sadie worked nights. She attended 2 classes. She did homework at the kitchen table while Micah completed scholarship applications beside her. Sometimes they argued over who got the charger. Sometimes Sadie fell asleep reading accounting principles. Sometimes Micah woke at midnight and found her staring at a problem until the numbers finally balanced. The brass key often lay between their notebooks. One evening, Micah picked it up. Dad's yeah. What does it open? Sadie smiled. Apparently old cabinets and bad decisions. Micah stared. I feel like there's a story there. There is. Will you tell me? When you finish your application essay. Emotional blackmail? Parenting. By spring, an internal position opened. Inventory audit assistant. Sadie read the posting 3 times. She met the education requirements now in progress, and her years inside Meridian gave her practical familiarity with operations. Still, she hesitated. Grant had promised nothing. That mattered. Sadie applied. She interviewed with 3 people, none of them Grant. They asked about reconciliation, inventory controls, documentation, discrepancy reporting. Then one interviewer asked, "What do you do when the numbers don't match?" Sadie thought about cleaning slips in her pocket. You don't force them to match. She paused. You find out what they're trying to tell you. 2 days later, she received the offer. Sadie read the email alone in the employee restroom. Then she covered her mouth and cried for exactly 30 seconds. Afterward, she washed her face and finished her shift. Her final night as a janitor came quietly. No balloons, no executive speech. Sadie cleaned the 10th floor boardroom one last time. She wiped the walnut table where her scraps of paper had once been spread before 12 strangers. Then she returned her company cleaning keys to Thomas. The brass key remained on her personal ring. Thomas held out his hand. You were one of my best. You're still technically on the clock? Then don't distract me. He laughed and hugged her. Sadie changed clothes in the locker room. Before leaving, she folded her navy uniform carefully. She didn't throw it away, she didn't hide it. She placed it inside a clean paper bag and carried it home. At the kitchen table, Micah was finishing a college essay. Sadie sat beside him and opened her accounting textbook. 2 notebooks. 2 futures. 1 old brass key between them. For years, Sadie had believed her unfinished education was a door that had closed. Now she understood something Darius might have known all along. Sometimes a locked door didn't need someone powerful to carry you through it. Sometimes you needed a fair chance to find the key and the courage to turn it yourself. 6 months after Sadie Price stopped wearing a janitorial uniform, Leonard Brooks still complained about Meridian's coffee. Some things apparently restructuring could not fix. At 9:05, on a Tuesday morning, Sadie entered the refurbished repair bay carrying a tablet and a stack of inventory reports. Leonard looked up from a workstation. Management. Sadie stopped. Say that again and I'm auditing your coffee budget. Leonard placed a protective hand over his mug. You've changed. I've developed power. You have a company tablet. Exactly. They both laughed. The room around them looked different now, not transformed into some gleaming fantasy. Different in practical ways. Shelving had been reorganized. Parts were labeled consistently. Repair histories were easier to access. Diagnostic targets had been revised, so technicians still had accountability without being punished for spending reasonable time understanding difficult failures. Most importantly, one section of the department now carried a new designation, refurbishment. Equipment that passed technical and safety requirements could be repaired, certified, and offered to hospitals that did not need or could not afford brand new units. Green Valley Community Hospital had already purchased 6. Sadie knew because she had audited the inventory herself. She also knew the new division wasn't yet a financial miracle. It had taken investment. Some projections had been too optimistic. Some processes had failed and been redesigned. But it was working, and Leonard was still there. More than that, he had become a trainer. At the far end of the room, 2 technicians in their 20s watched as he demonstrated how to identify an intermittent board failure. Don't trust the first symptom, Leonard told them. Machines lie. Sadie raised an eyebrow. Leonard noticed. People, too. Now you're philosophical. Trainer title went to my head. On his locker, Nia's photograph was back in its old place. His Steelers mug had returned to the shelf. But the cardboard box was gone. Sadie liked that most. Upstairs, Grant Whitmore had developed a new habit. On the first Wednesday of every month, his calendar contained a 2-hour block labeled simply floor. No media team, no photographer, no employee newsletter announcement. He went somewhere inside Meridian where he normally wouldn't. Shipping, manufacturing, customer support, receiving. Once cafeteria. The first time Grant stood behind the food service counter wearing a hairnet, Keisha Morgan laughed so hard she nearly dropped a tray. You look terrified, she told him. I negotiate with banks. Banks don't send food back because the fries are cold. Grant had learned more in 90 minutes than he expected. That was the point. He didn't always solve what he heard. Sometimes employees wanted things Meridian couldn't provide. Sometimes frontline ideas sounded good until finance examined them. Sometimes management was right. But Grant had stopped assuming distance made him objective. Distance he now understood could also make him blind. The Frontline Review Council met monthly. Its members argued. That pleased Sadie. A council where everyone agreed she had decided was probably decorative. Their second quarterly recommendation concerned shipping packaging that employees believed was creating unnecessary waste. The recommendation was partially rejected. Their third identified a scheduling issue that had been increasing over time. That one saved Meridian hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sadie kept both outcomes in mind. Being heard did not mean always getting your way. It meant your argument reached the room where the decision was made. Meanwhile, Sadie's own life remained stubbornly ordinary. Her Malibu still complained on cold mornings, although Earl had managed to repair the transmission without replacing it entirely. The irony made Sadie laugh for days. Repair before replace. Micah had submitted 7 college applications and 17 scholarship applications because Sadie believed hope worked better when accompanied by paperwork. And Sadie had completed her first semester. She earned an A in financial accounting, a B+ in business statistics. She complained about the B+ for nearly a week. Micah finally said, "Mom, you're 46, working full-time, sitting on a company council and going to school. And maybe take the B+?" Sadie stared at him. No. Micah laughed. At Meridian, she was beginning to notice someone else. Keisha. The 24-year-old cafeteria employee had joined the Frontline Council after the tuition assistance discussion. She was sharp, outspoken, and almost always carrying a textbook beneath her apron. One evening, Sadie entered the cafeteria and found Keisha sitting alone at a table. A laptop was open in front of her. So was a class schedule. Keisha rubbed both hands over her face. "Long day," Sadie asked. "Long life." Sadie sat opposite her. "What happened?" Keisha hesitated. "Next semester." She turned the laptop. Her required supply chain course was offered during hours that conflicted with her new cafeteria schedule. "Did you talk to your manager?" "She said she needs coverage. Did you ask about changing shifts? Everybody wants the morning shifts." Sadie nodded. Keisha closed the laptop. "Maybe this is stupid. What is college?" Sadie became still. "I've been trying to make this work for 3 years." Keisha stared at the table. "Every time I get close, something changes. Rent goes up. Work schedule changes. My car breaks." She laughed bitterly. Maybe college just isn't for people like me. Sadie knew that sentence, not those exact words. But she knew the feeling beneath them. It was the feeling of watching a door close often enough that eventually you stopped walking toward doors. Sadie's hand moved toward her pocket. The brass key was there. She still carried it every day. But she didn't take it out. Not yet. Instead, she asked, "Have you asked what doors are actually open?" Keisha frowned. "What does that mean? It means you're deciding there's no way through before you've checked every way in." "I checked. Did you talk to HR about education scheduling nor council representative?" Keisha looked embarrassed. "I am a council representative. Then represent yourself." Keisha smiled, despite herself. Sadie stood. "I'm not telling you it'll work. So what are you telling me to ask?" Sadie walked toward the exit. Behind her, Keisha reopened the laptop. That night at 12:17 a.m., Sadie was finishing an inventory report when she noticed the time. For a moment, she remembered rain on glass. Grant alone beside the window. 6 words. A cleaning slip on the carpet. Sadie touched the brass key. Back then, someone powerful had finally listened to a woman nobody noticed. Now Sadie understood that the story could not end with her being heard. The real test was whether she would notice the next person standing outside a door. And somewhere downstairs, Keisha Morgan was still trying to find a way to keep hers from closing. 1 year after the night Grant Whitmore cried, beside the rain-streaked windows, Sadie Price was still driving the same silver Chevrolet Malibu. It had 191,204 miles now. The transmission worked. Mostly. Earl had rebuilt the damaged section instead of replacing the entire assembly, which Sadie considered the universe's unnecessarily obvious joke. Repair before replace. She still lived in the same Hazelwood duplex. She still checked grocery prices before putting anything in her cart. Her life had changed, but it had not become a fairy tale. What had changed was direction. Sadie now worked in internal operations audit at Meridian while continuing her accounting classes. Micah had received an acceptance letter from a Pennsylvania university, along with enough scholarship assistance to make the remaining numbers frightening instead of impossible. Sadie had framed the letter. Micah had complained. She had ignored him. On a cold Thursday night, Sadie stayed late to finish an inventory reconciliation. At 12:17 a.m., she closed her laptop. The time made her smile. She walked toward the elevator. Then she saw someone sitting alone near the executive floor windows. For one strange second, the past returned. Rain, scattered papers, Grant's loosened tie. But this time it wasn't Grant. It was Keisha Morgan. She was still wearing her cafeteria uniform beneath an open coat. A letter rested in her hands. Sadie approached slowly. Keisha wiped her face. "I'm fine." That's rarely true when somebody says it before being asked. Keisha gave a weak laugh. Sadie sat beside her. For a while, neither woman spoke. Finally, Keisha handed her the letter. Community College of Allegheny County. Enrollment status. Keisha had marked the withdrawal section. "You're leaving, I can't make it work." What happened everything? Her mother had recently needed more help at home. Her work schedule had changed. Tuition assistance covered part of her expenses but not time. "I keep moving things around," Keisha said. "Something else always falls." Sadie understood. There were struggles money could solve. There were others that required time flexibility, childcare, transportation, courage, or simply someone who knew which form to request. "Have you submitted this?" Keisha shook her head. "Not yet." "Good." Keisha looked at her. "You're going to tell me not to quit?" "No." That surprised her. "I'm going to tell you to make sure quitting is actually your decision." Sadie pulled out her phone. She showed Keisha Meridian's expanded education policy. There was a provision allowing qualifying employees to request temporary schedule adjustments for accredited coursework. Keisha stared. "I didn't know that was there. Most people don't. My manager said the schedule was fixed. Then ask HR whether it has to be. What if they say no? Then you know." Sadie scrolled farther. "There are evening sections of your course next term. They're full." Weightless Keisha looked at her. "You've already researched this, no? I know how to read a course catalog." For the first time that night, Keisha smiled. Sadie didn't offer money. She didn't call Grant. She didn't promise the manager would approve anything. Instead, she wrote down 3 offices Keisha could contact in the morning: HR, academic advising, financial aid. Then Sadie reached into her pocket. The brass key rested in her palm. Keisha looked at it. "What's that, my husband's? What does it open?" Sadie smiled. "That's complicated." She placed it on the table between them. Darius used to say a key is only useful when someone remembers what it opens. Keisha touched the edge but didn't pick it up. "What does this one open? Once an old tool cabinet." Keisha waited. Sadie looked through the dark glass at Pittsburgh. "For a long time I thought opportunities worked like somebody important had to unlock a door and invite you through." She shook her head. "Sometimes people can show you the door. Sometimes they can make the lock fairer." Sadie slid the withdrawal letter back. "But eventually you still have to turn the handle." Keisha looked at the form. "What would you do?" "That's the wrong question." "Why?" "Because you have to live with the answer." Sadie stood. "Make your own choice tomorrow. Just don't make it tonight because you're tired." She picked up the brass key. It still belonged to Darius. Some things were meant to be passed forward as lessons rather than objects. The next morning, Keisha did not submit the withdrawal form. She went to HR, then academic advising. The process wasn't easy. Her first schedule request was rejected. She appealed with help from the employee education coordinator. Her college placed her on the wait list for the evening course. 9 days later, a seat opened. Keisha took it. Nobody saved her. She found a path and chose to walk it. That spring, Meridian's refurbishment division completed its first full profitable quarter. Leonard Brooks trained 12 new technicians. Green Valley Community Hospital expanded its refurbished equipment agreement. Rebecca Sloan still challenged almost every proposal the Frontline Council submitted, which Sadie had learned to appreciate. And Grant kept his monthly floor visits. One evening, Sadie crossed the lobby as the night cleaning crew arrived. She recognized Thomas pushing a supply cart. 2 newer janitors walked beside him. Grant entered from the opposite doors. A year earlier, he might have passed them while reading his phone. This time he looked up. "Evening, Thomas." Thomas nodded. "Mr. Whitmore." Grant turned. "Good evening, Renee." "Marcus." Both janitors looked slightly surprised. Grant continued toward the elevators. No speech, no applause, no camera. Sadie watched him go. Then she opened her hand. The brass key caught the lobby light. Once it had opened an old cabinet. Later, it had reminded her of everything Meridian had forgotten. Now Sadie understood Darius's words differently. A key was never valuable because it belonged to someone powerful. Its value came from knowing what could be opened and refusing to pretend a locked door was a wall. Sadie closed her fingers around it and walked toward the elevator. Years earlier, she had entered Meridian's important rooms only after everyone else had left, carrying a mop and emptying the trash of people who rarely knew her name. Now there were rooms where her chair waited before the meeting began. But that wasn't the victory she treasured most. The victory was that when Sadie finally entered those rooms, she remembered to look back toward the hallway, because there would always be another Leonard, another Keisha, another person standing close enough to the problem to see what everyone else had missed. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness was not rescuing them. It was making sure the door could open when they were ready to walk through it. We often imagine that the people who change organizations, families, or communities must be the ones with the most authority. But Sadie's story reminds us that wisdom does not always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes it is pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. Sadie didn't save Meridian because she understood finance better than its executives. She noticed what they had stopped seeing. And 6 simple words forced Grant to confront a question every decision-maker should ask. When we call something efficient, who is actually paying the price? Grant's greatest act wasn't giving Sadie money or handing her a special title. It was listening. And Sadie's greatest victory wasn't being rescued from janitorial work. She accepted a fair opportunity, returned to school, competed for a new position, and walked through the door herself. Then when she found Keisha struggling outside another door, she didn't carry her through it. She helped her see the handle. That is what meaningful kindness can look like. Not creating dependence, not becoming somebody's hero. Sometimes it means making sure another person has information, dignity, a voice, and a genuine chance to choose their own next step. If someone once saw value in you, when the rest of the world looked past, you tell us about them in the comments. And if this story made you think of someone who feels invisible right now, share it with them. If stories about dignity, kindness, and second chances belong in your day, we'd be grateful to have you subscribe and join us for the next one.